Hello, in this lecture we're going to talk about Perfect Competition, Chapter 13. We're going to start off with our quote from Alfred P. Sloan. Alfred P. Sloan being a CEO for General Motors, and his quote is, "There's no resting place for an enterprise in perfect competition." And that one's pretty self-explanatory to us at this point in time, being that no matter what, if we are in perfect competition, we're going to have to constantly change, we're going to have to constantly improve, we're going to have to constantly be better than those competing with us. So chapter goals explain how perfect competition serves as a reference point. We're going to explain why producing an output at which marginal cost equals price maximizes total profit for a perfect competitor. Determine the output and profit of a perfect competitor graphically and numerically, and explain the adjustment process for short-run equilibrium to long-run equilibrium. So we're going to start off with some definitions. Conditions for perfect competition. So a perfectly competitive market is a market in which economic forces operate unimpeded. So a perfect market is going to be the ideal. We're looking at kind of a spectrum here in terms of a perfectly competitive market versus a market that is completely controlled. And neither end of the spectrum is where we get to the end point of it. We're never going to have a perfectly competitive market. We're going to look at the conditions for a market and see how close we are to a perfectly competitive market in different areas. We, in this chapter, are going to focus on that perfect concept, the concept of a perfect market, and then when we apply that to later models, we'll have to see how close we are to perfect market and what kind of adjustments need to be made when a market is not completely perfect. So we have to look at the model, the most simplified model, which often can tell us the most about the world, being removing all other factors and looking at a perfect market. And then once we have analyzed that, we can then make adjustments to markets that of course aren't so perfect. For a market to be perfectly competitive, three conditions must be met. So both buyers and sellers are price takers. That's the first condition. A price taker is a firm individual who takes the price determined by a market supply and demand as given. So what that means on a consumer side, we kind of know this. We see that if we want something, we're basically going to have to pay the market price for it. So if we wanted a hamburger that's just like a normal hamburger that would be getting at any fast food restaurant, then mainly the prices are pretty much the same. There might be some differentiation, but for the most part, we're going to have to pay what we're going to have to pay. It is what it is. If we want just to get like nuts and bolts that are all, the same, we're probably going to have to pay pretty much whatever the market price is. On the other side of it, when we are producing things, when we're the supplier, when we're the maker of the burger or the nuts and bolts, it's a little bit more abstract for us to think that way because we often think that the business person has all the control. They have the control. They can set the prices. But notice in a perfectly competitive market, they too are price takers, meaning that if we were just going to enter the burger market and we're going to produce the same type of burger that like McDonald's and every other chain has, then we would have to produce it at that market price. We wouldn't have any choice because if we produced more or if we charged more, we'd probably go out of business. We'd be a price taker. If we charged less, then we'd go out of business because we wouldn't be able to pay the costs. So therefore, we'd be a price taker. We have no real choice. The same with nuts and bolts. They're all the same. Now, you might be thinking, I've gone to places where they have different prices of burgers and they have different this or that, and that's because they differentiate. So we'll talk about differentiating later. Right now, we're going to think about the idea where there is no differentiating. So from a private market standpoint, from a business standpoint, we don't really want to be in a perfect market because we want to differentiate ourselves. We want to be able to have some control over prices. So notice when we think about these types of things, when we think about them in terms of an individual business owner, our goals are often very different than when we think of them for the society as a whole or from government policy. From a business owner, we don't like perfect competition. We want to eliminate competition and take more of the market, have more control. If we think about a policy standpoint, the market as a whole, the people, well-being overall, then we generally want a lot more market competition because that, of course, will lower the price. So then the second condition for a perfectly competitive market, there are no barriers to entry. So barriers to entry are social, political, or economic impediments that prevent firms from entering a market. So anything that it's going to cost, like a startup cost, in order to enter a market, that's going to be a barrier to entry. Now note that some companies have more barriers to entries than other companies. Some types of businesses have more barriers to entry. when we think about barriers to entry, we probably think about things like government regulation. If we want to incorporate, we'd have to incorporate it. We got to pay taxes. We got to pay our employees, and those are all regulations that from the government. We got to apply and abide by those regulations. And that is often one barrier to entry, but it's not the only barrier to entry. I mean, if we wanted to get into something, even like a hot dog stand or something like that, we'd have to buy the hot dog stand or rent it and then buy hot dogs. So that's going to be a barrier to entry for us to just to purchase it. Notice if we wanted to buy or enter a market such as car manufacturing, even without the regulations that would be involved, just to buy the plant would cost a lot of money. So there's a huge barrier to entry when we talk about a lot of giant capital production type of things, just because of the cost to get off the ground, to get on the startup. On service companies, a lot less. If we were going to be a bookkeeper or something like that, we just need a computer, and then we could start building our client base. So some types of industries are going to have a lot more barriers to entry, some being government and political related, but others just being the nature of the business. So service businesses generally have less, manufacturing often has more, and notice that there's no perfectly barrier-less business. There's no business that has no barriers to entry. Like I say, even the hot dog stand, you gotta do something to start. And even if we're doing a service business, you gotta at least put in your time. So note what we are looking at is the ideal. We're gonna look at the picture as if there's no barriers to entry, recognizing the fact that that's the ideal that doesn't really happen. That's our starting point that we are going to start with, so that we can come up with our most simplistic, most elegant, therefore, graph by eliminating as many variables as possible. The third barrier: firms' products are identical. This requirement means that each firm's output is indistinguishable from any other firm's output. So when we think about the hamburgers, we're basically saying they're pretty much all the same if we're just making the same burger. Now again, you might say, well, they're kind of different, and that's true. Some places are going to make different stuff, but in a perfectly competitive market, we're going to make it the same. Now, note, in a real life, we want to differentiate. We want to say, hey, we provide better service, or we have a burger and it has sesame seeds on the bun, and theirs doesn't, or something, and therefore we have more differentiation. But we're gonna see as if we are in a market without any differentiation, and that's going to be within perfect competition. That's going to be in alignment with perfect competition. And you can think in this case like nuts and bolts, pretty much all the same. There's not much change or variation in that type of product. Okay, so profit maximization, level of output. The goal of the firm is to maximize profits. Now, this sounds harsh to some people, and even when you talk to small businesses, a lot of times they're going to say, you know what, I started a small business because I wanted to do this area, this service within healthcare, or I wanted to help these types of people, and that's why I started the business. Yes, we make a profit, but this was the goal. And I just want to point out that that's legitimate. I mean, but when we think about things from an economic term, or even if we think about things from how are we doing in terms of our business, if we are in perfect competition, if we're not cheating, then if we are producing a service that is good and it's superior in some way than the competitors, the results of that, the way we measure how well we're doing in terms of economics, is profit. So profit in a market is a measure of how well we are doing. So if our legitimate goal is that we want to produce the best hamburgers to the most people as possible at the lowest price because that's going to help society, that's fine. We could do that, and the result will be profit, right? So we're basically gonna say that, of course, profit is going to be our measuring tool, and our goal then is to maximize the profit. So profit is the difference between the cost and the revenue, of course. So a firm maximizes profit when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So keep these terms in mind. In economics, we're going to come back to this all the time. We're making decisions on the margin, meaning we're deciding, should we make that next unit of product? We've already made this many. Should we make the next unit? We're always making decisions on the margin. Should we make the next unit? And therefore, when we think about that, we're going to say, well, I don't know. The next unit's going to give me this much more marginal revenue, and it's going to give us this much more marginal cost. And if the excess marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost that the next unit of production will have, we will make more. If, on the other hand, our marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that's going to be our stopping point, because usually after that point, we'll have diminishing returns and we'll actually reduce revenue by producing more. So remember that marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue associated with a change in quantity. So when we make one more unit of stuff, how much more revenue in relation to the next unit are we getting if we're just making one unit? The relationship would just be divided by 1 because we're making one more unit. So how much more revenue divided by the 1 unit in that case? And marginal cost is the change in total cost associated with one more. So if we made one more, how much would the burger meat cost and that kind of stuff to make the one more burger? And therefore, we would be looking at the margin of the cost of one more burger. So profit maximizing level, the profit maximizing condition of a competitive firm is where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. It's always going to, pretty much always that's going to be the case. We're going to just memorize that. We're going to produce basically where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. It's almost always going to be the answer. And intuitively, you can see that why that would be. If we just keep on making one more unit, and we then decide when is it going to even out, when does marginal revenue equal marginal cost, that's when we stop making one more unit. We stop there. So for a competitive firm, marginal revenue equals price. Now, we can derive this. I'm not going to do it here, but you may just want to memorize this. It makes sense intuitively because we are a price taker. Therefore, the marginal revenue is going to equal price if we are in a market of perfect competition. So this marginal revenue is just going to equal the price. What is the price? The price is the market price. Remember, we're a price taker. We can't change the price. It is what it is. We're stuck with the price. Therefore, the price is going to equal the marginal revenue. A firm maximizes total profit, not profit per unit. So if marginal revenue equals marginal cost, a firm can increase profit by increasing output. So if the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, then we want to increase output because making the next unit will generate more marginal revenue over marginal cost. If, however, marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, a firm can increase profit by decreasing output. So notice that we went too far in that case. We actually produced too many units. We can actually do better by producing less units. And of course, where are we going to get to in the end? We're going to get to that point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That is when we are maximizing our profit.